We are here for Sex, Sport, and the Nondisabled Myth. This event is hosted by Cripple Productions. I'm the co-founder and the director, and we are a film studio telling anti-ableist stories from the disabled community. I'm going to give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about tonight, and then we'll just jump right in. So I want to first do something that I've noticed happens a lot in disability spaces, which is talk about intentionality and showing up in the space. And so, first of all, welcome to what we call crip space. That means that you're in an environment that was organized by disabled people. So please show up in whatever way your body naturally calls to you. If you want to stand up and stretch, if you want to let out a spasm, if you want to stim, that's all cool here. I would generally say don't let the abled gaze defer you from doing whatever you feel is right in the moment. When we're talking, if you would like us to slow down, if you would like us to speak up, if you would like us to clarify anything that we're saying, you can raise your hand, you can just call out. Don't feel like you're interrupting any kind of timeline that you're on or that we're on. We are all also on crip time, which means that we have no adherence to schedule whatsoever. And that's why this event is either starting 30 minutes late or 30 minutes early tonight. So, yeah, that's intentionality in the space. I want to talk a bit about the summer event series we're doing called Sex, Sport, and the Nondisabled Myth. This started when our production company was asked by a sportswear group to do a series of events and videos highlighting Paralympics from an anti-ableist point of view. And when we started talking about that job, our entire team went, how does sport exist without ableism? And that's kind of what brought us here tonight and what started this whole series. We have 3 events going on through the rest of the summer, one in Paris and one in London that you're all welcome to come to. And what we realize that we have to do in these events is we need to start talking about why sport is considered to be so ableist and why sport cannot be practiced without ableism inherent in it. And so part of the work that we're doing tonight and in general over our series is we are decoupling the idea of ableism from sport. And I think that's going to need an explainer for anyone that is identifying as able-bodied, watching this or listening in the future. In the disabled community, there's generally 2 types of person. That is the sporty cripple that is engaging in sports and overcoming their disability by virtue of participating in a sport and moving their body. And then on the other end of that spectrum, there are disabled people that are proud of our identities and kind of necessarily reject any participation in sport. And that's something of like an oversimplification ad absurdum, meaning that there are a lot of disabled people that practice sport and don't feel like they need to fall into those 2 very limited categories. However, that mindset does exist within the disabled community's consciousness. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Mostly tonight, we're going to focus on the idea of sex and disability. And the relevance of that piece tonight is that what we find in sport culture is that large sporting events tend to represent what is the framework of perfect embodiment, meaning what it is to have a perfect body that works at 100% capacity and that has the ability that everyone is supposed to want. And within that idea of having a body that works perfectly is having a body that is reproducible and that's worthy of reproducing. And so we have this disability binary in which disabled people sit on one end of undesirable and not reproducible, and on the other end you have the alleged non-disabled who have perfect bodies and are all headed towards being Olympians and existing in a perfect state of constant ability. So tonight with the panelists, we're going to unpack those ideas a little bit and figure out how, if, when that all shows up in your work. So first, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with you. Your name, your pronouns, and just a broad overview of your work.
Thank you, Sid. My name is Jeanette Chedda. My pronouns are she, her. And the last 3 years, I've been intensively working with a collective, a disabled collective in the Netherlands that's called Feminists Against Ableism. And my part in that was mostly through speeches. In 2020, I did my first big speech with Feminists Against Ableism on International Women's Day. It was really close to the Corona lockdown, and it was even ridiculous the event went through because there were already a lot of Corona, COVID, people infected with COVID. But I did that speech, and from there on, I got into more work because the speech was so kick-ass that everyone wanted to book me for something. And to be honest, when I was asked for that speech, I didn't even thought of myself doing that speech, because I thought this collective has so many amazing people, amazing disabled feminists. I don't think I'm ready to do this. But a few weeks before I was asked, I decided to say yes to everything I was offered, because I wanted to lose like the feeling that I was not worthy to be on that stage to represent Feminists Against Ableism, because I always like downgraded myself. And Feminists Against Ableism for me was really a community that just let me be, and I was looking for that for a very long time. Most of the members of Feminists Against Ableism, we didn't even like ever meet in person because most of our work is online. And I did a few speeches in collaboration with Jax Davis. They are at Slaapkamer Activist on Instagram, and they can write the best speeches, but they cannot go out to perform the speeches because they're too sick. And the Netherlands is very inaccessible. And one of the biggest misconceptions of the Netherlands, and I want to debunk that right now, is that the Netherlands has a great accessibility for disabled people. And I mean accessibility in a physical sense, but also in a social sense. And yeah, I can name a list of a lot of other work, but I'll leave it at this for now. So thank you.
You can be self-promotional if you'd like. You can speak about some of that other work.
Yeah, I can do that, but I was already thinking maybe I'm talking too long.
No.
So the other work, I've been politically engaged for the last 3 years also. In 2021, I was on the list for Bijeen, the most left party in the Netherlands. And that campaign, this political party is the only one that includes ableism and a lot of other overlooked subjects in the Dutch politics. So I was on the list for the national elections, and we got a great podium because we are a party with little budget. But then when everything went in lockdown, our social media online game was the best of every party that was out there with their big budgets. So we got one seat in national parliament. And after that, I founded a chapter in my home city. And we did the next elections for the municipality. And we kicked some ass in Delft, and they really woke up. So that's a part. I like the subjects, disability, the intersection, disability and sex. I want to talk about it a lot. That's why I really was happy to be invited to this panel. Because every time I go to events where disability and sex is talked about, yeah, I'm so happy because I didn't grow up having a lot of opportunity to like have how do you say this?
You can say it in Dutch, I think.
In Nederland heb je niet echt de gelegenheid om veel te praten over wat het betekent voor gehandicapte mensen om als seksuele wezens gezien te worden, überhaupt. En ik voel me in Nederland super genegeerd. I've never been hit on in the Netherlands on the streets, but like look at me and are you? I don't know. I wanted to say something ableist, but. Anyway, I don't understand the Netherlands. I don't understand the way people with disabilities have to live here with so many people closing their eyes with the discrimination and everything we face as disabled people. So every chance we get to have these events, preferably organized by disabled people, I get happy. And happy isn't even the good word for it. But I think thankful and happy. I'm enjoying myself already from the moment I got into.
Thank you. I'm just taking notes on what you're saying, by the way. I'm not on Tinder looking for anyone. Menko, go ahead. You next. Do you remember the prompt?
Are you sure it wasn't Tinder or maybe Field?
Field.
You have to stay current.
My marketing material tonight.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Menko. I am a queer crip artist based in Amsterdam. I'm also Dutch, but not from Amsterdam. And I've been working, or I've recently graduated from my MFA. And during my MFA, I've been focused on developing my own artistic practice. That's that's based on the theme of representation of the disabled body, and I used the topic of invisibility and visibility as a framework to work through or to work with. And yeah, during my graduation, I've been able to make a very bold art installation, I would say, which was about sexuality and disability, of course. And to be describing a bit more so you know what I'm talking about, it was a big art installation of 3 big medical swings, which were used for, or which are used for transferring disabled people from their wheelchair onto a different object, or for example a bed or a chair or whatever. But this shape of those swings look very similar to the shape of a sex swing. Those are from the underground sex scenes. So I was like, okay, it's really interesting to use these for my art installation. So I have used these objects and upgraded them a bit by giving them a BDSM look, by applying leather and studs and using red lights while exposing or exhibiting the art installation. So it really looked like a dark room, which is very hot, of course. And by using heat of this hotness, I was able to visualize invisible images on those objects. And it was a triptych, so it means there were 3 images shown, or 3 objects. And one object in the centerpiece showed me being fucked by a man with the text, "Fuck disabled people." Well, that's very out there, of course. So not everyone was really, or not really, but a lot of people were really taken aback by it and like shocked almost, which is exactly why I did it, because I don't think it's really that shocking to show part of the human experiences. Yeah, there were also another photo of me being embraced and another one of me performing a oral...
Please elaborate.
An oral activity. I don't know if that's a parent PC term. I don't know. It's like, whatever. I don't even know if we need to keep it PC, but like
You don't have to keep
I
it
already
PC.
said fuck disabled people, so that's out the window anyways. Yeah, so I've been using my own experiences of my queer disabled identity for my works. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Because I like nuts. I don't know. It's up to you now. Sorry.
Hi, I'm from the underground sex scene. Hi, everyone. My name is Aoife, and if you know different, no, you don't. That is a pseudonym, which I will explain a little bit more, I'm sure, as we go on in the panel. But as the name Aoife would suggest, I am indeed Irish, and yes, that was the single most influential factor on my sexuality to date. No, I'm not wearing a cross because I'm Catholic. So my work, I work, like, let's say, in two different realms. One is between human rights and mental health, and within those realms, I focus quite heavily on disability, sexuality, sex workers' rights, and specifically violence, whether that's state or non. But I also work part-time as a professional dominatrix. So when Sid asked me to be on a panel about sports, I said, yes, I do sports. Water sports, hard sports. If you know, you know. If you don't, check out my website and you will. Yeah, what else to say for now? Well, the good thing about working between both mental health and BDSM is that on any given day, CBT can mean either cock and ball torture or cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is a lot of fun when I mix those two up at the office. Yeah, I think that's all for my little spiel.
Well done, you sickos. Okay, we don't have to go in a particular this way order, but as I ask a question, if one of you feels moved by the Spirit of Christ to speak, please go ahead. The first question that I have is going to, I think, broadly address the rest of the answers that you give tonight. It's specifically about desire and the idea of feeling not desired as a disabled person. And so the question is, first of all, do you feel like there is a social connection between desirability and disability? Probably yes. And how has that specifically impacted your work in terms of experiencing that firsthand? And I will give you the mic first.
I think growing up feeling invisible as a brown, disabled, visibly disabled woman in a wheelchair, I've always felt like I had to do big things to get noticed. And I always had a big urge to, like, I think partly moved by internalized ableism, but also partly by proving others that I am a worthy part of society, even though people don't think that if you look disabled. But also coming from a very conservative background, it was very hard for me to, like, take the stage. So when I found Feminists Against Ableism, and I could just be, and I didn't have to, like, prove myself, I could just exist and not do anything, and that was enough. From there, I really flourished into being more myself and taking that stage more. And the way desirability impacted my work, I don't really feel desired by the place I live, the Netherlands or the cities I move in. So I'm very happy for the internet and all the internet possibilities we have, but also I hate it. And yeah, I think it's very difficult for the person I am, the identity and the intersections in identity I have, to like exist in the Netherlands. I really don't like living here, but I don't know where else to go, because I've traveled a lot, and I know that there are places where my person and me as an individual is more appreciated the way I deserve. So yeah, yesterday I came back from Dubai, and people with disabilities are called people of determination. And everywhere you saw that term, and I had to explain to my family what it meant. They didn't like understand what it meant, and I wasn't. It was like 40, 42, 43 degrees over there, so I didn't have the energy to like go into that. But the accessibility in Dubai, for example, is like 7, 8 out of 10. And the way people socially treat you is yeah, not to my liking, but it's also not to my liking in the Netherlands. And there are so many different people in Dubai, and I don't know, the life is more outside there. And in the Netherlands, we're all boxed up, so you cannot physically meet people very easily. And to make the bridge to sports is also almost not available if you're disabled in the Netherlands. If you, by example, compare it to London, I know it's a big difference in how many people live in London and in the Netherlands as a whole, of course. But I feel like there are more opportunities there to like live a regular life as a disabled person than in the Netherlands. Like, we really need to like crush that misconception about the Netherlands being a very good place for disabled people, because it's not. Yeah, so that's my answer for now.
Thank you. As soon as you start talking, I have like 10 million more questions, but I'll let you guys go next.
Sorry. Yeah, desirability, that's such a big concept, which is difficult to unpack in like, even in an hour. I can't. But like, for me, for example, as a queer man, or a man identifying man, there are these archetypes of the able-bodied man, the archetype of the Western beauty standards, which are everywhere. But I think especially within the queer scene or the gay scene, it's like the able-bodiedness is held to such a high standard. Like, as soon as you have like a pimple, you are not up to standards anymore. And gay men are looking for the next one without a pimple. Well, my pimple is a wheelchair, which is always there. So it's like very difficult to navigate for me as a disabled person. But also, I know I am desirable. And I think that's like, with growing up in an ableist society, I have had no other option than to unlearn myself and all internalized ableism and show myself how I love myself and how I can desire myself, and also keep myself hope that other people will treat me the same way as I treat myself and my body, and how I am desirable because I feel I am desirable. And I don't even have to say I feel, because I know I am, but like, it's other people's laws. They don't see it the same way. But obviously that's a very paradoxical way of thinking of like how I view myself and my identity and my being, and how the outside world views it. But yeah, somehow there is still hope within me, even though it's very difficult to stay hopeful in this world. But for example, with my work, I am very well aware of disability aesthetics, for example. And disability aesthetics means that it's important to refuse the able-body aesthetics. And by showing other ways of being, I already create a change in trying to normalize everyone's uniqueness. And hopefully also, in the case of sexuality, a desirability. But yeah, that's what I think is really important, but it's a very difficult challenge. But also, as we said earlier, I like challenges and games. What about you?
That felt pointed. So for me, what immediately sprang to mind in thinking about responding to the question on desirability was to speak more about why I'm actually using a pseudonym today. And primarily that is because in my persona as a sex worker, as a professional dominatrix, I am not, let's say, fully out as disabled. It's not something that I would actively hide, for example. When I go to a play party, I usually obviously have my cane with me, but the sort of median party goer does assume that it's just yet another implement with which to inflict my wrath, which it is also. But it does serve, also a quite a necessary function. Never underestimate the capacity of a pervert to sexualize any given object. So again, it's not something that I necessarily hide, but it's also not something that I, as Sheryl Sandberg would say, lean in to yet, because again, it can be something that is used for marketability or potential niches and things like that. But I think specifically in thinking about sex workers generally, there's a very large rift between people being able to imagine that actually a huge proportion of sex workers ourselves are disabled, because this is a job that allows us to take care of our bodies and meet economic needs in a way that is counter to the dominant economic structure. But it's this understanding that sex workers or disabled people are not desirable, and sex workers by definition are sort of like hyper-sexualized or hyper-desirable. So the two can never sort of intertwine. But I mean, what I think I get specifically from my sessions is really this feeling of being desired, that in many ways, and specifically through, having a body that has been so medicalized for so many years and had so much interaction with medical systems, it's nice to feel re-sexualized in certain settings, and actually kind of using, fodder from those medical experiences to then my own advantage and to sort of turn them around, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say for now. I think sex work can, be many things and bring many things, and there are also many challenges along with that. Another is, of course, just being, let's say, allowing yourself to be known and giving more of your personal experiences away, where clients would maybe prefer to see you as more of a one-dimensional object, always, sort of conforming to the concoctions that they have made in their head, which are already predetermined and, of course, we know very much shaped by ableist standards themselves, in terms of the Dom being this sort of like all-powerful, omnipotent presence who has no weakness or no vulnerability, whether that's at, you know, like a bodily or an emotional level. So, yes.
I didn't know that you were more than one-dimensional, so that's great to hear.
Are you secretly also a Gemini?
Okay, I think my next question is something that you each spoke to in a different way. It is broadly in what scenarios you feel most desired, and if there is a necessary separation from your disabled body, and if there is a relationship in which the less disabled you seem, whatever that means, the more desired you feel.
May I? Sorry.
Menko, you first, please.
Yeah, also to go a bit in detail or hop onto something you said about overly sexualized experiences, which fits the answer to your question. Whatever. Disabled people often, or not often, but sometimes fall in the category of certain disabled fetishists, and then we are talking about devotees. And these devotees are people who are really turned on by anything disability related. For example, if someone is an amputee, they are really get a kick on seeing and doing things with the amputated body part, but also, for example, it can be about seeing someone struggle to get in or out of their device or mobility device, or whatever way, but like this. Yeah, for example, I have experiences with devotees, which is really weird because it feels like they are just sexualizing the disability aspects and therefore erasing my personal identity. And in my case, there is a harmony within or with my disability and my other identities. They are one, and not just, you can't just pick one and ignore the rest. So it's very weird for me to have these encounters where just one element of my identity is just lovable or desired. And it's really weird, but also it's a bit like splitting my identity in two. So it's also like, oh, but I like the sexual acts you're doing, but I don't like the reasoning for you why you're doing it. But then, for example, I also had some instances where the people were like, okay, you have a disability, that is fine, whatever. And you know what, let's use your, for example, your wheelchair or my wheelchair, let's use it to our advantage and see it as a way of creating a unique experience for both of us while not ignoring a certain ability or disability. And those occasions are really fun and really special because then it's like more united on all parts. And it doesn't mean like, for example, the parts where someone is like more adhering to the able-body gaze and are ignoring my disability. Those encounters are also fine because like I don't mind if my wheelchair is part of the play or not or whatever. It's about me. So as long as people feel like they like me and want to spend time with me as a person with all identities, then it's really hot and steamy. But otherwise, it's very creepy in a way. But then, it's a lot. But also, sorry, I feel like I'm talking quite long.
Please, if you want to share some sex stories, Menko, please.
No, I'm not that open, y'all. I'm a bit private, a teeny tiny bit. You have an announcement.
I'm gonna go pee for a sec.
Please. Again, crip space, everyone.
But yeah, it's also someone, not so long ago, I met someone and they are really my type. They are like perfect. They are fucking handsome. They are in the creative field. They know what they are talking about, but also what I'm talking about. And that's a certain synergy I don't have the luxury of often. Because whatever. That doesn't happen a lot. But then this person was like, I love you. I want to have sex with you. I want to do this with you. And he was quite explicit, which was hot and horny, of course. But then it was also like, what? Do I believe you? No, you're just saying it so you can see me naked or can do things with me, but like those are just for one encounter and not like, it's just, not really true, right? But then I was also like, shut up, Menko. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Also, sorry, not to yourself anymore. But like, just erase these thoughts and believe the words are true. But like, in this ableist society, it's rare to have these encounters, and then to hear people say like, I like you, I want you, it's like so out of, or so extraordinary, it's almost surreal. But then also like, let's take a word for granted. So, I don't know what more anymore, and I don't know, maybe you can say something, or you, I don't know, keep the microphone away.
I'm glad we're learning to listen to our inner voices. Let them guide us. So first I want to just put out a little, I just want to extend an offer. If anyone is watching, if any crip is watching and they would like to, let's say, monetize these little, offers they get on Grindr and such, about fetishizing aspects of disability, I'm very happy to help mentor. And I will add, from my perspective, I think there is a large niche to be filled, if you know what I mean. But
I think they know what you mean.
So I'll speak to sort of, I have to give a bit of context to my response in speaking about sort of how this happened. Well, I have an acquired disability. I have nerve damage that was the result of a surgical error, and so I have quite extensive nerve damage in my spine and abdomen. That is unfortunately the exact nerves innervating this whole area situation. I think you also know what I mean. Which is to say that 6 years ago when this happened, I had to relearn how to have sex essentially. And I would say now there's certain forms of sex that are just really not aligned with my nerves, which is to say kind of that heteronormative, PIV, let's call it jackhammer style. For me, having that kind of sex is literally like playing Russian roulette, which can be hot, and believe you me, I do enjoy a game. here or there. But even that for me, caused me to like go through a relationship with my own sense of desirability, but it was more of a desirability to like external, I was going to say external forces. That makes it sound so ominous. I mean, it is like cis heteropatriarchy, basically. Because I, felt like I wouldn't be sort of seen as the ideal, let's say, agile sexual partner. But also, it's fine because I'm a massive lesbian. So sorry. But yeah, so that was a little bit of a journey, let's say. Another thing that happened at that, due to this kind of combination of factors, was that I could no longer express myself as I was used to in a BDSM context, which is to say, as a little submissive bitch. Sorry, you can maybe edit that out. And so I, sort of said, okay, well, if I can no longer endure pain, now I'm going to learn to inflict it, and I did. So I think that is, sort of nowadays when I feel most desirable, it's wearing my latex, and it's like having full control and knowledge about the sort of experience I am doing onto another's body in a consensual way, of course.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about what you both are saying and pointing to is kind of like the space of objectification, right? When it's hot, when you're in control of it, and when it's not and you're just the recipient of it, and how little room and space and consent you ultimately have in playing that role. I think there is a big connection there, and in terms of like not having control over your own identity and what is perceived about your own identity. And because into sexual interactions come also all of the social weight and stigma, I think there is that kind of connection between the way your body is seen as serving a sexual purpose and the way that somebody interacts with you. Would you like to answer the question, which is the same since you went to the bathroom?
I don't remember.
It was when you feel most desired, and if that has a relationship with being perceived as less disabled.
So, my brain doesn't compute the question.
When do you feel most desired? That's the first question.
I feel most desired when people take the time to like connect with my brain instead of everything they see, and take the time to like get to know you instead of asking me if I need help randomly when I'm smoking on the street. So I found a new go-to. When someone asked me for help, a week ago, or a week and a half ago, I was a panelist on this other event. It was also about sex and disability. And it was during Pride Week, or the beginning of Pride Week, I don't know exactly, but this panel was part of this Pride event, and then I came in the event location, and the first person I saw behind the table with information about this person's organization was, "Can I help you?" And I was irritated instantly because I was like, okay. So I acted like I didn't hear what they said. So they repeated it, "Can I help you?" So I said, "Yeah, I'm single." I said, "Can you help me with that?" And he was quiet for a few seconds and was like, "What? Yeah, I'm single. You asked me how you can help. So I'm single. Can you find me someone to like date with?" And then the way he was so confused, as I perceived him as a non-disabled person, able person, was so fun for me. So I'm gonna keep using that line, or saying I'm single, because maybe it will end up in a date. You never know. So at the end of the night, I came back to the person and I said, well, did you find me a date? So they said, no, but my boyfriend is available. But he's white. Is that a problem? And I was like, for what? And he was like, yeah, to have sex with maybe. So I said, yeah, I'm not looking for someone to have sex with. I'm just looking for a serious date, like finding my person in this life. So we exchanged numbers. I never heard of this person ever again. Oh, I need to check my Facebook DM, by the way. But I don't think I heard back. But I think it sparked, how do you say it? Interesting reaction, because, yeah, you never know. And that's not exactly a moment where I felt desirable, but when someone really connects to my brain, and I don't know if people in the room or you or one of the other panelists recognizes this, but when someone looks at you, you can see why they are looking at you. Because when I walk the street in the Netherlands, and I went to New York 3 times, and I feel like when I walk in the street in New York, people really look at me instead of look at my wheelchair, the way I'm smaller than a regular person, or the combination of being brown, a woman in a wheelchair, being a little person, which also is a fetish, by the way. Yeah, so when people connect with my brain.
Yeah, I think I think all of those points are similar experiences that most disabled people have, particularly with visible disabilities, that, connect with, and certainly I've experienced the same kind of thing. I have just one more question for you guys. It is centered on the idea of non-disabled and being non-disabled. So a big part of this event series that we're doing is called the Nondisabled Myth, which is that we're also debunking this idea that there are non-disabled people. My question is a 2-part question. First, do you believe that there are non-disabled people? And a little background on that is that we kind of get constantly changing statistics about how many people are disabled, right? Classically, we have the 20% of the world population is disabled. And then more recently we got, but when we include like what the full breadth of disability is, including neurodivergence and cognitive disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, it seems more like 70% of the population is disabled. And then I think at some point we just keep getting closer and closer to this idea, like perhaps what we considered to be normal and non-disabled is actually the majority of people. And so the first part is like, are you familiar with that ideology? Do you believe that there are people that are just super abled, non-disabled people? And the second is how that archetype and that idea of a perfect person sits out of reach, how that has created a sense of internalized ableism in you, like where the internalized ableism shows up because of that. I realize that's like an 8-part question. So if you want to interpret that in any way that you feel it is, I think the primary question is non-disabled real? And 2, where's the internalized ableism still showing up for you in the idea that anyone is going to be a non-disabled person? Take it away.
This is a really long question.
Okay, first of all, what do you think about the idea of non-disabled people?
I think if the metric of disability is whether you understand that you cannot or you're not entitled to a sex worker's time for free, no one is abled. Everyone is disabled. Same thing if you can't follow the instructions on my website specifically.
I think that's what everyone is referring to disability as.
Right, I think that's the new Washington set of questions. So what kind of struck me albeit it was at a certain point in the question before it evolved and, grew like 7 other heads, like the Hydra. How many heads does a Hydra have?
3.
This is a crip Hydra. I thought of my my clients and my my sessions. I think like in a way access is just already baked into that process because you're asking about what you're already very candid in asking about limits and desires and things like that. And as part of that, you also have to ask like what is and is not possible for your body. How long can you conceivably stay in this position? How long can you endure a certain type of pain? Depending on what metric you're using, someone like if you're thinking like what is there's no standard metric for that. So then how do we even measure like what is, let's say, disabled or not in like a kink context? But I mean, often a lot of my clients, will, by virtue of things like age, but not only, have very specific needs around like what positions they can and can't be in and whether they can be on their knees or bent over in a certain way or, like having their hands up, things like this, things that, we would need to know in order to be able to put someone in bondage safely, which might vary depending on the form, but I think these are the things that we're accustomed to needing to know about someone before a session. So, that was just a little kind of reflection and thinking about, like, in the dungeon, disability, like, is sort of, in a way, present a lot.
I mean, I think you're totally right about that spectrum of what is being asked, like from what are your limits to what are your desires, right? And that is effectively the same question that's being asked within a disability context, but in a very different way. But to the same point of what is trying to be known from the moniker. You want to take a stab at the second part of the question?
You want to just do another stab at what it was?
Internalized ableism. So the idea being like that you should want to be non-disabled, right? And even if that's a falsified idea, does it still show up for you in, how you think about yourself, how you interact with clients? Anyway.
I think it's plain to see in a sense, yes, because otherwise maybe I wouldn't be here using a pseudonym, or maybe I would because, again, it's also just about like keeping yourself safe and not letting like certain facets of information be known, like, for example, the fact that I'm actually a submissive, because that would ruin my brand. But yeah, I think it definitely does play into things. And again, like, even if I think about, one day incorporating my disability into play somehow, there's probably, parts of that I would and would not include, like parts that I would see as, let's say, like, that's too far, like too much to give away, let's say. And others that I may think like, okay, this is maybe conceivably something that can be sexualized by sort of like the median, person who interacts with my persona. But yeah, I just want to share a little anecdote from like a dispatches from the street, as Jeanette did, with regard to my cane. Let's pretend it just works back into your question, which it maybe kind
Please.
of does. But yeah, I often get like approached about my cane in public, and it's shocker. Often who appear to be cis men and are appearing as abled. They're often asking like, oh, what does it do? And then I'm like, I would show you, but you probably can't afford it. Sorry. But yeah, for example, like I had a response to someone who came up to me and he said, like, you have a cane, and I was like, it's an accurate observation, yes. And he was like, but you're so pretty.
Yeah, that makes
and I was like, I don't understand why you're repeating information that I'm already aware of, but also I don't understand the correlation between these two facts. And maybe that has something to do with like internalized ableism. I don't know, of me, of other people. That's what I'm going to say about that question.
Menko.
I think you unlearned the internalized ableism because you can be pretty envious again.
Oh.
So in that sense, you unlearned. Yeah, you did, but the other one didn't. Shit.
Do you remember the question?
Not anymore. I knew it like 1 minute ago.
Do you believe that there are non-disabled
the
people?
non-disabled
Also,
myth.
this is the last question, so you really got to go out with a bang.
Bang? That's the first one. I think everyone over time will become disabled, and maybe the only moment is right after birth when the body is non-disabled. But then obviously some bodies are still disabled, like mine. But I do think it is still a myth. But because of how society is ableist, there is set this certain ideal or standard which everyone wants to comply to, and therefore people are unconsciously aware of the systemic discrimination against disability, and therefore they are unconsciously trying to be separating themselves from the disabled community in whatever way that's possible. But in the end, I think, it's a myth. It's a dream. Something, or it's a nostalgic fantasy. It's like, let's take, for example, glasses or optical lenses. It's like, that's a disability. But people are not aware of it being a disability because their access needs are being met. Yeah. But still, those people are disabled. So when you look at all disabilities, I think almost everyone, like maybe 0.000000000000001% of the world is non-disabled. But I think it's a myth. I still have internalized ableism myself. And I am aware of it, so therefore I am also maybe more able to sometimes counter my negative thoughts and my internalized ableism by showing like, okay, I am disabled, I am still perfect, I am a sweet angel. Baby angel, sorry. And everyone has to deal with that. And I am me, you like me or you don't, and that's okay. I want to say that's fine, but no, that's not fine. Obviously, I want to be liked by everyone. But also now I come across as a attention-seeking person, but that's also not the case. But maybe I am. I don't know.
Maybe it's a disability.
Was there more? Nope. No, right? I think I answered all your questions. So one last bang. Bang.
That was going out with a bang, thank you. Okay, Jeanette, we can end with you if you would like. The same question about, is non-disabled a real state? And then how internalized ableism shows up for you.
I think non-disabled people don't exist. Especially after hearing your explanation about the concept and ideology. To be honest, I never thought of it that way until you explained today. But I, in that sense, fully don't believe there's a non-disabled person on this planet. Because of the diversity of disability, and because of the metrics you explained earlier. So basically, disabled doesn't exist. That's also what you said, right? Yeah. So that's very. You said a lot of interesting things. So that's one part of the question. And how internalized ableism shows up with me? Yeah, a lot, to be honest. I just had the answer, and now it got lost. It shows up. Oh, I have a recent example. I went to Dubai for a week, and I was with people. And to be honest, the accessibility I experienced in Dubai where I went was like 7 or 8 out of 10. And I could do a lot myself. I have a manual wheelchair, and this one is also a few months old, and it's a big step up in easiness and technology than I had before. So I'm really in love with this wheelchair, and it makes me more mobile, and I can like roll myself without help for a long time. But few parts of the city were old, and the way my internalized ableism showed up at this vacation was when I needed to be pushed. I didn't felt comfortable asking to be pushed in my wheelchair. And I also felt like it was a burden. Yeah. So I had to learn how to ask help more in the last 14 years, because before that I was acting abled, whatever that means. And then I had my first burnout. So then my process of accepting my disability started, actually. And I asked for help more. But the internalized ableism is really hardnekkig. How do you say this in English? Hardnekkig? Deeply rooted. And so, yeah, I'm still struggling with that on a day-to-day basis. And in dating scene, it also shows up a lot. Like, I've experienced a lot of afwijzing. How do you say this in English? Rejection in my life. Whether it's a job or people being friends or not, or any kind of human relationship, education-wise, like rejection in the broadest sense of the word. But the most hurtful for me were always the interpersonal rejections. So I don't even know how to open up at this point, if I'm being honest, and I'm really working on that. And this vacation also opened my eyes more in the sense of I've been sick for a long time. This is my second appearance since a year I've been on a break. And yeah, I've been making steps about unlearning the ableism I have internalized. And we really need more spaces like this in the Netherlands, because I feel like disabled people in the Netherlands, I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. But I'm going to stick to the Netherlands because that's where most of my experience is from. But disabled people are also very much isolated from day one, especially when you need a mobility aid like a wheelchair or something else. Because in my case, I grew up and I went to special education for people with physical disabilities. I had to go to hospitals a lot. So then they bring you there with special, how do you say vervoer? Taxis and stuff, yeah. So that's also an isolation. Then I went to high school, and then the kids went with public transportation and I couldn't go. So then you're isolated. I couldn't participate in gym. Then you're isolated. And then most of your time also goes to like the bureaucracy of being disabled. So where do you have the time to like connect with people? Also in a country where most of the most of social life happens inside. But if you can't get in, how are you going to participate? So I think loneliness is a very, how do you say this? Ongepraat, hoe zeg je dat in Engels? Yeah, the subject is not spoken about with disabled people, I think, enough. Because, of course, there's a lot of shame with it, but I'm not afraid to like, say it anymore. I often feel very like lonely because of being isolated so much throughout my life. And I'm 40 now, 40 and a half. And yeah, it's a big thing to like realize and then confront and then work towards being less lonely. Yeah. And then spaces like this pop up. Yeah, I'm really, really grateful for that. And I know I don't have to be grateful. Like, I feel I don't like the word grateful in this sense because we deserve these spaces, but at the same time I am because they're so rare in the Netherlands. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, constantly, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to kind of summarize all of those points, I think what you guys talk about is like disabling events as well, right? Like talk about isolation and the kind of emotional impact that has long term. Menko, you talk about birth trauma, which is like the initiation point that people start experiencing a unique kind of experience. And then you talk about hitting people and bending them over and if they can do it. So that's our panel. Those are our panelists. We are open to take some questions. I think we have a little bit of time if you guys have anything, questions or comments, anything you want to say or talk about. Yeah. I wonder if we can you take the mic?
Thank you so much for the panel. I meant to ask, what are the specificities about Netherlands that you mentioned that are like not welcoming? But then you kind of explained it towards the end. But then I was more wondering about the cultural community. If you feel a bit more welcome and regarded or seen by that community, and especially in places like this.
Mm-hmm. Do you mean like just maybe me and her personally as people not from the Netherlands?
No, also people from Netherlands.
Okay. If we feel more accepted in a situation like this.
Yeah, because just to put it into context, I'm also disabled, but I have diabetes and I have a sight impairment. Mm-hmm. Which is different, but I also often consider like seen it or I experienced it as it's a taboo. I mention it and people overlook it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hey, this is serious thing. I just cannot take a train or I cannot do this sometimes. Yeah. And I'm mostly in the artist community, you know. I studied here for a bachelor, master, come to this kind of places. But I still don't consider my condition to be as serious, maybe. So I'm wondering about your situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer to it first, and then if you guys want to talk about it. I think that's kind of like a core misconception in terms of ableism. It's this hierarchy of bodies and hierarchy of conditions, right? It's like we look at people that are quadriplegic and like have as little movement as we think that a person should have, and we say like, oh, that's serious, like that's bad. And that I think kind of enforces this idea that there is a better way of being in a better body. I think perhaps how it shows up for you as well, a lot of our team, our production team, have invisible disabilities, and the seriousness with which their disabilities are treated are like, oh, that's not real, right? That's not a real disability. The only people with real disabilities are us three and not you, which is like really how that shows up, because when you need accommodations, or did you just aggressively put your... There she is. She's better. But yeah, the way that shows up and the way that we're kind of socialized to understand that we are disabled exists on a false premise that like only some bodies are actually bad enough to be considered disabled. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately what that does is continues to enforce that stigma around what a disability is. Well, yeah, I think what we just spoke to was like that disability appears in many different ways, and the assumption that you are non-disabled because you don't have a visible disability is one that is clearly wrong, right? I think to speak to feeling more accepted in this space, I would say yes, because we designed this space, but I think that speaks to crip space in general, which is incredibly limited. It's like only a place where disabled people lay the stage for other disabled people and so-called non-disabled people to be in a space together. And I think besides the spaces that we make for one another and when we are in community, for me, I don't have a sense of acceptance in any of those other spaces. I feel like although it's not something I will do anymore, there's always an expectation for me to explain my body and explain what's wrong with me and every other ableist question that comes up first. And it's only like, yeah, around other disabled people that I know those questions aren't going to be the topic of conversation. So, Jeanette, Menko, Eva. Don't you have a mic? Oh, you're going to take it?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's on my wheel.
First of all, thank you for sharing. I think that's important to acknowledge. But also, I think in spaces like these, these spaces create an atmosphere of openness and intimacy in which everyone is allowed to be themselves in whatever way that's needed for everyone. And it allows for moments of, for example, you sharing a personal identity, I would say. And by doing so, it creates already a certain connection that doesn't happen in places in which a certain standard is set immediately, because by setting a standard, it's also immediately excluding. And I feel as if in crip spaces, there is a welcoming atmosphere or a welcoming standard for everyone to just be themselves, and especially to share access needs and access needs, whatever works for everyone. And I think it's in spaces like these, people can truly be themselves, and that's what's so wonderful about crip spaces. And so disheartening about the other spaces. But
Other spaces are missing out. Yeah.
True that.
You guys want to answer?
Yeah, I can say something very small, I guess. Well, I think like for me, I mean, like my body is always an unwelcoming space to myself personally. So like, I think it's kind of like I can, like the space, like there's only so much that external space can do for me. But like, as you mentioned, it's more about then the capacity to be able to like feel you can communicate those things, right? Like the fact that, like okay, it's not even a welcoming space. I was like thinking of bed. It's not even like a welcoming space, but like it's more welcoming in certain scenarios. But yeah, it's like the importance of like having a space where that can just be kind of like acknowledged, but then not even like it doesn't like overtake any other kind of like discourse or conversation. And yeah, like I feel like it kind of relates to like what you were talking about with like invisible disability. Like there's so many, like I would look really disabled if you saw me in my bedroom after like a 2 or like 3 week pain flare, but no one sees that. Or like some, like certain people might see that, but a very limited, small number. And like that, those are the kinds of disabled experiences we don't see in the streets because my bed doesn't have wheels on it. would be fun though. Yeah.
I don't know why I'm taking the mic from you. Do you want to speak? Or?
But I don't remember the question.
About welcomeness in this space. Do you feel more welcomed in this space?
Yes, I feel very welcome in this space. And what I said earlier and what you Sid also said was there are very limited spaces like this. I told you from second one, I almost had to do nothing to come in. Like I could park in front, I could roll in, there was an accessible toilet, and then I was like, oh my God, where am I going to wash my hands? So I came out and then I could wash my hands. So like this smoothly, I rarely like encounter that. So yeah, I feel very welcome. Great snacks also. 10 out of 10.
I think we might have time for one more question or comment. And
No, I wanted to say thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
I was asking myself whether you have an idea or an imagination on how to address disabilities better in discussions like that, or in discourse generally. Because I mean, when it comes to gender and when it comes to sex and all of those issues, there are ways by now on how to deal with it language-wise, or how to deal with it in a proper way. But when it comes to disabilities, I think it's hard because first you have to acknowledge that there are forms of not being able to do something. That's the problem about old buildings, because there are no elevators. That's a problem about pedestrian areas when there are like steps you have to, or in stores, whatever. Like that's a physical, those are physical problems that are connected with certain forms of disabilities. At the same time, you said something about about a reaction you had when somebody asked you whether you need help when you just were in the front of some place and were, I guess, smoking. I don't know, but at the same time, I think, or I know that in Germany, where I am from, people tend to not ask whether somebody needs help. They do not ask. When you ask somebody, they will of course help you. They do not ask. And my brother is dependent on a wheelchair too, and we went to the United States a few years ago, and I had comparable experience in some way, because everybody asked us whether we need help in front of the subway or something. But at the same time, like it, of course, and it can be inappropriate in some situations to ask. Like that's just one example of talking about disabilities. But I think it's incredibly complicated language-wise to acknowledge disabilities and at the same time to address them in an appropriate way, which is necessary to address them somehow. And if I ask myself whether you have some ideas on how to deal with that issue, because I'm getting more and more insecure about how to. Even though I grew up with a brother who.
Thank you for your question. I have a question back before I going to elaborate on my thoughts. But do you know the term ableism?
Yeah.
The first thing I thought when you asked your question, and maybe you already did, so forgive my advice if it's not relevant to you, but what helped me mostly to address and form more language to address disability and stuff is to learn more about the mechanics of ableism and how it interacts with all the other systems of oppression, but also hire disabled people and not try to talk for them, like hire me to address these things in spaces where disabled people are not there. But in another instance, if you are somewhere and you want to address it and there are no visibly disabled people there, if you don't try, you'll never like form the language for it, and you'll never like grow over the uncomfortability of speaking about it. So I would say just go ahead and do it, because the urge is there. This is what I hear from you. So if your toe is hurt and you tell no one about it, but it's uncomfortable, making you uncomfortable and making you like walk with pain, you cannot fix it if you are not talking about it. So I would advise, even if you're uncomfortable, just educate yourself. That's one, but also just do it and hire disabled people and pay us. That. I hope that's answer to your question.
Okay, maybe between the four of us, some useful advice will come through. But I think what's unique to the disabled community is like how much people vocalize discomfort around us, right? Which is like, I think even to you, like, your brother has a disability. It's not that you're uncomfortable with the idea of disability. It's like what you're speaking to is discomfort in knowing what language to use and when to ask someone if they need help, or if you're German, to never ask someone if they need help. I think the way it is in the disabled community is actually the way it is in every other oppressed community, which is like, I imagine like if you don't ever spend time with queer people, then every time you encounter a queer person, you're like, kind of fruity, like, don't know what's going on here. And if you know one fruity person, then you're like, that's kind of weird. If you know two, then you're like, oh, I guess there's some diversity between them. And then if you know like 3, 4, 10, if you start hanging out in fruity spaces, then you stop thinking like, you become gay. That's what happens. I think that discomfort goes away. And even along the conversation of being disabled and non-disabled, you stop looking at yourself as separate from the community, right? You have so many friends in that community. You know so many people that you respect and whose opinions and voice that you listen to, that you no longer have a sense of like, what do I do here as an outsider? You just really see like, just me and the fruitcakes, me and a bunch of fruity people. And I think it's the same with disability. That being said, there are plenty of disabled people that will not appreciate being called cripple. I don't personally care to stop saying it or stop interacting in that way, but it's like that's the natural diversity within the community as well. I will say as well, I hate when people ask me if I need help all the time, because it's when I'm doing the most benign things. It's when I'm like sitting literally every single day. Today I was on the corner sending a text message. Actually, I was telling one of our members of our team this story. It was raining. I was sitting on this corner sending a text message. A guy came up to me and said, "Do you need help?" And I was like, what are you going to help me do in this situation? Like, are you going to send this text message for me? Are you going to throw yourself on the ground in the water so I don't get wet? Like, what is the perception of me not doing what I'm supposed to be able to do that you're interacting with? So, yeah, if you find disabled people who love being asked if they need help, let me know, because I'd like to diversify my community as well.
But don't diversify too much, because then you become one. That's true. Apparently. But yeah, I am girly pop, just to say it again. But yeah, I think it's exactly the discomfort you notice when you address disability in able or non-disabled spaces. The discomfort is a clear elephant in the room, but it needs to be burst. I think that's the right term, right? And I think, like, for example, if you have a boundary which is clearly there when you address a disability, then by breaking this boundary, I think it can be meant in a more progressive way, in which change and innovation can occur. But yeah, it's a very difficult task to do for every person, whether disabled or non-disabled. But yeah, I don't know, maybe an interesting read recommendation is Killjoy Handbook by Sarah Ahmed. I don't know if you know the book, but it's very interesting to read how addressing discriminatory systemics is automatically perceived as a killjoy, even though it is very necessary in this world to do so, to be progressive. So yeah, maybe that's an interesting thing to read. That's my Sarah Ahmed. Yeah. Ahmed. Ahmed.
I'll say, yeah, just a little something. I don't know if this will answer the question necessarily, because I think it's more on the interpersonal level in terms of these scenarios, but I think there is something to be said for wider education around reading of non-bodily or non-verbal cues in any scenario, which is something we don't teach people how to do. But then I think in the ableist context, it goes back to a lot of assuming you know someone's needs better, or that you are essentially able to make those judgments for someone else, and then it intersects with racism and sexism and all these other isms. But even if you think of something as if I'm walking walking gay pace, full forward, I probably don't want to be stopped and asked hey, how'd you get your cane? Or but if I'm sometimes, okay, admittedly, if I'm on an airplane and I want someone to put my bag up, I'll be oh, I'm so weak. Oh, if only there was someone so strong. And you can, there's a lot that can be always gauged from actually just being taught to read people and how they are interacting with the space. And that goes from everything from asking someone for help in public or in sexual scenarios, right? Asking about needs and wants and preferences and desires and this kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So you're saying yes to consent in general. Good idea. That's a good idea. Okay, I think that's all we have tonight. Thank you. Oh, do you have an urgent question? No, I can answer something. Oh, yeah. Do you want to? Okay, thank you.
I wanted to say, I think there's a difference in sometimes you can see when somebody needs help. So, for example, where I live, there's a really steep hill, and I had trouble getting up there with just using my arms. And I could see just people staring at me and walking by, and I could see I was struggling and nobody was helping. And then somebody did eventually come and ask me for help. Instead of not just grab my wheelchair and push, he asked, like, would you like some help? And in that moment, I was like, oh, yes, because I thought I was going to roll backwards. So I think if you see somebody is struggling, like sometimes I've had it with a door, and I have this wheelchair suitcase that I attach to the back. And like if a door is really heavy, it like falls back and I can't get in between it. If you see somebody really struggling like that, I think that's a moment that you could be like, oh, would you like me to assist you? Or and I think definitely ask, just not just grab and push, because sometimes, it just really gives you a shock if you don't see somebody coming. So I think in natural situations, even if you didn't have a disability, if you see somebody has a few boxes in their hands, and is struggling to open the door, you'll naturally ask like, hey, or open the door for the person. So I think in that sense, it's the same with a disability.
Of course, I hope that I can see when somebody really needs help or somebody is just minding its own business. But I think the reason for my question was because it is very interesting for me to listen to you right now, because all people with disabilities are in severe physical forms of disabilities in our society or in context to us, whatever, and those are, or most of them are not able to articulate their own needs. Like they are in a that's a different situation again. So I am. It's very interesting for me to listen to you, because you are very eloquent, and you are just articulating everything you need, which sounds fucked up when I say that right now. I don't know. I'm sorry. I cannot. Right. But there's just like I think the issue or the thing I meant was like that it's always complicated to me to match the own ableism, ableism you have with the embodied ableism you have, or everybody has as well, because those are always on like different levels, depending on the specific situation somebody is in, and that can be complicated, I guess. Just that was the thoughts I had.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, there's complexity, right? It's not necessarily confusing, or it doesn't have to be confusing. But I think even as you talk about people that are nonverbal, it's not that communication happens only through vocal articulation, right? You do get a sense of people who are nonverbal. There are many ways of communicating a need and a desire, and I think that also speaks to knowing a person and learning a person. Are you nodding your head and like that makes sense, or like maybe?
Yeah, you're right, of course.
Yeah.
I think maybe some of the question there is more about the varied levels of understanding ableism that each person holds themselves, and that, not knowing where, like, I'm thinking about our work in particular, like we're doing some work with the Paralympics coming up, and even with Paralympians, there's an extreme level of understanding about ableism and being extremely ableist themselves. Like that variation is held within Paralympians as well as every single other person on Earth. And so I think that's kind of what I hear from you also, is like knowing like how do you discuss ableism, especially if the person you're talking to has no fucking idea. And so sometimes I think that answer is, okay, this is not my job to deal with teaching you ableism 101, but maybe, like Menko shared, like, okay, this is a book that really helped me. And so there's been times when people have asked me like, oh, how do I dip my toes in understanding ableism? And I'm like, oh, like if I have the capability that day, I'm like, okay, here's this TED Talk that I really enjoy. Here's this book I really enjoy, and here's this podcast. Like, go at it. But some days I think it's also fair to be like, yeah, I think ableism 101 isn't for me to share with you. And that, yeah, you could also type in ableism 101 on Google and see what happens. And like, that's a good Google search too. So yeah, just I guess I heard in that question, like, yeah, how do you engage with even different variations of ableism that people hold?
Yeah, I was hearing that as part of the question too. Again, I don't know if that was the core of your question, but I was hearing that and thinking, there's a great question of like, you know, a disabled person to a disabled person, like how do we communicate with each other about the amount of ableism that we're practicing? And I think, again, with a lot of Paralympians and a lot of athletes, like I just won't engage them because they are in fucking cuckoo land. And I believe that's an ableist term. But like they're just like, I'm gonna win this marathon, and then I'm gonna get an exoskeleton, and then I'm gonna be walking. And I'm like, yep, definitely. Go for it. But yeah, I was gonna say to your point too, like even I realize I even hear the own internalized ableism in my head where I'm like, I will never ask an able-bodied person for help, even when I legitimately need help, because I do not want them to reinforce the idea that disabled people need help. And so when I am struggling the fuck up a steep-ass hill, I'm like, just me, I'm gonna do it.
Well, I think it's also sometimes with me to feel like, oh, then I ask and then they just ignore me, and I find that even more annoying that I'm like, oh, please help, and like everybody's ignoring me and just walking by. So, but I think with the countries, what you said of Paralympics, I think that really depends on what part of the world you come from or what country, because I went together with her, we went to London, and I think we saw already so many differences between London and the Netherlands. So I think there's a real difference in that already. So if you sometimes know where somebody comes from, culturally as well, sometimes it can really make a difference. But did you mean it in general, or did you also mean it sexually? Because I thought that would also be interesting.
You don't have to. You don't have to do it. You can be like, I'm good. This has become a new conversation.
Probably.
I think we like where it's going.
I mean, everything is connected, right? I mean, but
Yes.
but I think, I mean, I just thought out loud, I guess, and I think it all comes back to the point that you just have to get to know a person, like always, like everywhere, and then you can deal with things. I just initially I just thought about how discourse in society can look or can work in an appropriate way, because like the whole complexity with individuals. I mean that's I mean of course that's not it's. You have to deal with every person themselves, but how can discourse in society look in a way or address? I mean, that's also connected to the things you do, because we had that talk and you told me about shifting narratives, and maybe that's how.
It's all interconnected. I think that's what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Do you think, because when you're in the Netherlands, I don't know if it's how it's in other countries, but then sexual education starts pretty early, and do you think because they don't talk about anything about disability even within these lessons or show any kind of pictures, do you think that's why there's even more ableism, or why people don't see people with disabilities as attractive, or that you can have a relationship with them because you can't see them anywhere within the books or the context of the lessons?
Or in the school itself.
Huh?
Or in the school itself.
Yeah, or in the school itself, yeah.
Sorry.
Do you think it would make a difference if they would have that in lessons. So if they talk about relationships, that they also, when people talk about relationships, a lot of people don't think about people with a disability or that people can have a relationship with a disability. So if that would be part of a lesson that is mentioned, or even when they, in my class, they even show different positions. If they would then have positions with people in a wheelchair, and like, oh, you can have sex in a wheelchair or with a walking stick, like, yeah. And like, I always say, how boring is your sex life, or how creative of a thinker are you? So it's like, I think if they would put pictures in there, or maybe even have somebody speak within the lesson, or give the lesson from a wheelchair, do you think that would make a difference, that the younger generation may see people more as, oh, you can date somebody with a disability, they're the same as us?
I think partly it would help, but like a fraction.
You can help, is that what you said?
Huh?
You can help.
What?
That should model in a disability sex, in a
I took a different twist.
for children.
Yeah, of course.
Well, you
She's
made
a
book,
model, so.
You made a book about stories, I remember, with different people.
Oh, yeah.
A written one, then.
But that's another subject, right? Or not? I don't know. No, I don't know.
No, the book that you made with different sex stories of people
I
with
think
disability.
it makes a difference, partly, but I think that the for the Netherlands, the problem is deeper rooted, because what I said earlier about the isolation of disabled people, I feel like we are not part of het straatbeeld. How do you say straatbeeld?
You don't see it in day-to-day society?
No, you don't see visibly disabled people in day-to-day life. I once went to Bilbao in Spain, and I never realized how few visibly disabled people are part of everyday life, like visually, or in a representation, what you asked, or we're so invisible that people cannot even think about having a relationship with someone with a disability, because most of the people don't know people with disabilities. So I meet roughly two types of people who know someone with a disability, an able person, or someone who went to school with a person with a disability, and they are more open to the concept of disability and more open to disabled people in general. But I think it really starts with like the big segregation of disabled people from regular society in the Netherlands.
Would that be a way to begin, by having them in the books?
Well,
Would it be a good beginning by having them in the books?
yeah, sure, let's shoot from all sides. Ik bedoel, the one doesn't exclude the other. Let's do it all. But the problem is very deeply rooted. Like, it starts from day one when you are born with a disability. In my personal life, it began when I was born, and people didn't know, of the staff of the hospital didn't know why I wouldn't stop crying. And then after a few hours of research and stuff, photos, they discovered I had broken bones. So I was in freaking pain. And then the doctors thought my mom and dad abused me. And my mother thought the hospital staff had dropped me. So, and they also asked my parents if they wanted to keep me.
Oh, wow.
So the violence starts very early, like, and then the isolation, and most of the public spaces are not physically accessible for disabled people with what kind of disability dan ook. That's the deep-rooted problem, and that doesn't help, zeg maar, abled people to get to know disabled people.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help, like, in the integration. I don't like the integration, but it's a thing. Yeah. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. Menko.
But and I can come back to the book, by the way. I think it's important, very important, but it's just a part of the whole package. So I did this project for Damn Honey. That's a white feminist duo in the Netherlands, and they made a book. What was the name again? Oh, Damn Horny. The name of the book was Damn Horny, and it was a collection of sex stories from different kind of people. So the people you usually don't see in mainstream porn or mainstream erotica or mainstream whatever. So I was asked to write a story, and the book really blew up. Like, you never see through the lens of usually from, in my instance, a disabled brown person, woman. So I think it helps. Long story short. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Representation matters.
representation matters, yes. Jam, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to say, like, I feel like all of those three comments and questions were, like, perfectly interlaced. Like, the discourse does not exist yet. Right? I mean, we're building out the discourse, but it doesn't exist because of these long-standing, deep-rooted histories of, like, oppression systems. So, like, people not being able to attend school, so that there's not discourse happening there. And, like, often mainstream society is influenced by discourse that happens on these higher levels. Unfortunately, it's very classist, but that's how it's gone historically. And so if disabled people historically aren't able to reach these higher echelons of discourse and conversation, like, that conversation can't be spread to all people. And so I think, yeah, exactly what you all said, like, yeah, there's not representation in younger school systems as there isn't as much representation in higher school systems, so then you don't see it,
And
representation out in the world, because it's lacking from the historical front, the discourse, the higher education, like, it's lacking everywhere.
And specifically, like, social places is like the most out of all, where you should be making these connections and finding people that
Right.
are like-minded or people your own age.
Right.
They're usually just not accessible. I mean, I don't know if the dungeons are, but the social places usually not.
Yeah, I think also I can maybe tie all those ideas together as well, but I think that's an important point. What you're speaking to is exactly the work that we do in film production, which is that we expand the visual vocabulary, right? And so what you're talking about is, like, why don't we know anything about disabled people? Why don't we see them in books? Why don't we see them anywhere? We have a friend, Penteja. I don't know if she's your friend, but she's an artist. She was part of this art exhibit we saw in Southern California that kind of spoke to the visual vocabulary of disabled people. And the only place that you see disabled people and disabled bodies is in medical textbooks, right? And so we have this kind of cage that we live in, which is that we are seen as people that have escaped our natural habitat, the hospital. And we're kind of all doing that very difficult work of expanding the visual vocabulary of disability and of expanding where disabled people are and what it means for us to exist and work. I think a big looping together of all of those points is what you two experienced in London, which is that disabled people have ontologically a better view of themselves, right? Like, aspire for more. And a big reason of that is because across the UK, there is a requirement to the amount of disabled people that are shown in any type of media. So the BBC has this demographics rule, I forget what it is called, it's like the 50-20-10, I think, something like that, which is that on BBC, the presenters have to represent what the demographics of the UK actually are. So they have to have 50% women, 20% disabled people, 10% people of color, which doesn't seem like the correct percentage as I say it now. But they employ that rule because that is an actual reflection of the people in their society. And so I think the reason that in London you see and you experience disabled people with higher aspirational value goes back to something that you said, which is unfortunately linked to class as well, right? Like within each country that has more money and has more resources and has more assets to allow people and platform people to experience life in the ways that they want, the more you see specifically disabled people, but every other oppressed group living the life that they want, achieving success in whatever way that means, and being able to really experience life without having to answer to all of the other stigmas that are put on them beforehand. However, if you are poor and a person of color growing up in the UK with a disability, I think the likelihood that you ever have that experience of self-actualization, self-realization, like, oh, I am a person of equal value, is less and less and less given every identity that intersects, right?
I want to add a cage to the cage you mentioned. The medical cage is one cage, but on the other hand of the spectrum, I always say we also are in the charity case. The only people I feel like are visible disabled are the Paralympians and the people that work in charity. So like poor disabled kids who need money to play in the speeltuin. Hoe zeg je dat?
Playground.
Playground. Yeah. So that.
And that they don't want to pay you because you have a disability. That's a big thing over here. You can only do charity. That they don't want to pay you here if you have a disability. Yeah. But I think the reason she also really, I remember what she told me when we were in London. She said, wow, that guy just looked at me. He looked at me like that. I was attracted. Should we go back? You know, and I remember because she was like, wow, people here look at me for me and they're not looking at my chair. I remembered that was something I could see that you were so amazed, like, oh my God, I'm getting so many attractive looks here. And that's what I also realized in London myself. Like, I always, like she was saying about this space, I always go to London because they have disability entrepreneur groups, because they have these kind of panels. They don't have it here, and really miss it. And then that you have to travel to another country to find it is sometimes kind of sad. And the same with dating. Yeah. It's here, the first question is, oh, but when is it going to be over? I always say the guys may have a stick between their legs, but they don't like it when a woman uses one. Yeah. Well, in your case, different story, but...
Yeah. Did you guys want to speak to any of those points?
I can say something very shortly or briefly. Representation destigmatizes. So in that sense, I'm like, yes, every way of representation matters. Whatever, if it's about interracial couples, interabled couples, it matters. Or also just queer couples, like representation. It should be everywhere. Yeah, that's very short. But
so this may come as a surprise, but in Ireland we don't even have sex in our sex education, let alone any other topic. I am amazed to hear you learned about different positions on offer. We were led to believe that missionary was the only. We weren't even shown a picture, by the way. It just existed, in the zeitgeist. So, that kind of shows you the extent to which that's already, excluding a huge group of people. But I think what I wanted to say is, maybe a bit of a cheesy message, but, just when you were mentioning books, I can't think about books without, engaging in this wider discourse on, censorship and, banning of things. And I think again, there's, so many areas that, the system of discrimination against sex workers and ableism intersect, but one of them I think that we see very clearly is about censorship of certain bodies on specifically online, if we think about platforms like Instagram or other social media, or even platforms that are specifically made for pornographic material. There's still so many barriers about like what can actually be shown, whether that's like things that are seen as non-normative or like deviant sex acts, or things that fall out of that like normative category, or then bodies that are not in that normative category. They're always going to get flagged and have like a higher level of scrutiny. So my message is like, we should all
change those. I actually have an experience with that. A few years ago, I joined in with it's actually in the US, an inclusive swimwear calendar, because back then she got denied for Sports Illustrator and she had a cane, and so she wants to make one herself. And so they were using this print on demand, and the calendar, they were not allowed to print it because it was seen as porn. Even though just some were wearing a swimsuit, some were wearing a bikini, nothing, really out there. And it was purely because people had a disability. And so I think that's really true of the censorship. And I don't know how to really get around if that's all the way at the top in the guidelines. But yeah, it's sad in that sense.
I think you could be in that sex textbook that you wanted to see.
Well, I guess Menko, with what you showed as your art exhibition, I do think it's a creative way to show what things could you use as like sex props when you have a disability. I think it would be really cool if they would make a lacy knee brace, for example, because like some people need to wear a knee brace because of the support they would need in positions or something, or certain neck pillows that would be an advantage. But those are things they don't talk about. And I think with couples that have a word for it, when one has a disability, one doesn't. Interabled relationship. I think with a lot of them it would also help, because most of them, they all say they are just experimenting, but they don't know how. So that could be your next art project.
Okay, we have to wrap up our panel now. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming. Again, we have more events in Paris and London, and apparently we need to do a lot more in the Netherlands, so keep an eye out for us back here. Thank you, guys.